Okay, so what I've done is I've worked up my sketch from our day one a little bit further along to kind of try to get to a point where I'm gonna start showing teeth. So, you know, like the top part of my drawing is pretty unfinished, but I'm working on showing you some of the tooth details. So you can see I've got my skeleton right next to me so that I can see my reference, right? And what I'm gonna start doing is when I'm focusing on teeth, I want to avoid just drawing straight lines, okay? We want to like actually look at them as teeth, but you also need to think of them more as shapes. And that's what's going to really help you moving forward on this. You can already see how smudgy I am, right? Because if you start thinking about them as teeth, you're going to draw what you know instead of what you see, okay? So I'm going to start by trying to find my negative space, which is this dark space in the gap in the teeth. I wonder if I can pull this up a little bit closer so you can see. I'm focusing on this gap, okay? And I keep moving my reference photo, which I don't recommend you doing, all right? But so when I'm focusing on finding that gap, I can see that it's wider on the right side, and I can see where it starts to go kind of back in space, but I don't want to create too much foreshortening. Right? Because what's happening is you see more bottom teeth than top teeth, right? But you don't see it straight across, okay? What's happening is it's going back in space. Okay, it's not a straight line. Yep. Cool, moving my reference again. All right, so I find some of that negative space. And then what I'm gonna start doing is I'm gonna start trying to find markers that really show me where things are. For me, that's the shadows that are here. Oop. Gave him a charcoal mustache. All right. What I'm looking at are the shadows where a mustache would be and the shadows in the lower jaw of the face. Okay. Now I can see that we've got some really good dimples. I can see that this side goes in a little bit. And I'm finding my value around the teeth, all right? You wanna try to think of it as like, almost like excavating the teeth, okay? And the same thing with up here. I'm gonna start trying to find some of these shadows. You'll see that I'm gonna start finding things like, sorry, I have to break out a bigger piece of the vine charcoal. Like this line that kind of comes straight through. What I'm looking at there is the actual line that I see on the skull. Because I see it, right? So I'm gonna try to draw it. And I know that that comes straight down. I know that there's a little bit of a chip out of this front tooth, because skeleton art assistants don't get dental. The only one who finds myself funny, I'm so sorry. And then what I'm gonna start doing is I'm gonna start kind of trying to find the bottom of my top teeth by bringing my shadow up in space just a smidge, right? So what I'm doing is if I'm trying to think of like how to show it to you on a bigger scale. I'm taking this shadow and I'm kind of finding peaks on it, right? Right there. Now you don't want to autocorrect and just start drawing them exactly where you see them, right? These teeth are kind of jacked up. So I'm gonna draw them, or not draw them as you know them, draw them as you see them, right? Because the space and the depth is gonna get smaller as they start going back in space. Okay? And that's a really important thing to note, is that, you know, things do get tinier as they go back in space. And it might even get to a point where you don't see a lot of them. Okay? I'm gonna do the same thing with my bottom jaw, all right? Especially because I can see a little bit more of those teeth, as I'm gonna start kind of showing where those are going back in space, all right? I'm gonna do the same thing from the bottom. I'm gonna start kind of trying to find where some of my shadows are. But at this point, I also wanna start working with my kneaded eraser, okay? Because what I'm gonna do with that is I'm gonna start finding the areas where the tooth is highlighted. Now, I'm still working predominantly with my vine charcoal while I'm finding the teeth, but you're gonna wanna be getting to a point where you're gonna start bringing in your compressed, okay? Because that's what's gonna prevent you from erasing out too much, right? Like, because right now I could really smudge this away. So I'm erasing out where I see these highlights, and I'm letting them go back in space a little bit. I'm letting them get pretty large. I can see that the right side of my skull is brighter than the left side, and I'm gonna go back in and emphasize the lines in between the teeth, okay? Because I have to work up in a team, right? Fine charcoal and kneaded eraser, teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work. God, really, still, I'm the only one who finds myself funny. So, I'm gonna start sort of erasing out my left side, but I know that, again, I don't see as much on there, at least when I'm drawing from life. So I'm gonna focus on finding my shadows. So I'm gonna use a lot more of my vine charcoal and start kind of erasing out, all right? I'm gonna do the same thing with the bottom teeth, okay? I've got areas where I can really see my shadows. I'm gonna go back in with my eraser. And I'm gonna start kind of erasing out. You can see I'm reforming my eraser every time. That's what's gonna prevent me from getting into that autocorrect, right? I reform it so that I can make sure that I'm adjusting accordingly. And I'm erasing up. Do you see how my bottom tooth is coming up above my top one? All right, that's because I see these back molars, and they come up in space. And I'm gonna start making some of my smaller marks, and I'm gonna go back in, right? And I'm gonna start shading kind of the spaces that I see around them. Again, we want to fight that autocorrect. It's that urge to just draw in our tooth line where we see it, right? It does make for a great gesture of teeth, but it's not accurate for what I'm seeing in front of me, okay? I'm gonna keep shading my jaw. And then I'm gonna work really tiny, tiny details in. Which are just like areas where I really see a difference in the teeth, okay? where it's very clear that there's a line between them. Now on this side again, it's going to get darker a lot quicker. And they start going back in space, right? So once I know that things are starting to get properly dark, right, it might be time to start bringing in some of my compressed charcoal. And you can see I'm working with very, very tiny pieces, right? And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use that darkest dark compressed charcoal, and then I'm gonna go over it and use my vine to blend it out, right? That's how we get our full range of value. We use our darkest dark, and I'm gonna kind of go in and emphasize where I see some of these teeth. I'm gonna use my vine charcoal again. To start blending that out. Okay. I'm gonna see where some of my shadows are. I'm gonna get my eraser teeny, teeny, tiny to try to erase out some of my highlights. But the reality is that I'm gonna probably need my hard eraser for those moments. But my hard eraser is really dirty. So I'm going to, I'd say I would aggressively try to clean it up, but I'm not even gonna do that. I'm gonna cut it, because this might be beyond saving, and now I've got 2 erasers instead of 1. But I'm gonna use that teeny tiny point. And I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna use it to kind of chisel out and work in tiny circles. Where some of my brightest brights need to be, okay? But I won't be able to find my brightest brights if I don't create areas of contrast. All right? So everything needs to work together as a tool. My compressed charcoal needs to come in, my vine charcoal needs to be there, my eraser needs to be around. I'm gonna take my compressed in on my other side. Blend that out with my vine charcoal. I'm gonna take it in a little bit in that tooth gap. And right now it's acting as a really harsh outline until I go in and I blend it, right? So it's that same thing. I can use it a little bit. To make small marks where my darkest darks are in my teeth. I can use my vine charcoal to blend over it. All right. Again, I'm finding the base of my teeth line up here, but it's darker because it's almost in shadow. So to let those fall back in space, I'm using my compressed charcoal. And I'm blending out teeny tiny marks. Yeah. You can see kind of what I mean from far away. We've got really well rendered teeth, right? But I want you to really see that up close, it's all just tiny mark making, right? Like back here, I'm gonna use my scissors to point. It's all just small shading to show depth and how things are moving back in space. It's the difference between my compressed charcoal being my darkest dark and my vine charcoal showing that things are going back in space. It's important details like the highlights, right? The shading in the jawbone itself becomes really significant, okay? Hope that is helpful. Thank you and enjoy your day.